Hello, friends. I'm Lee Hinson-Hasty. I'm the Senior Director of Theological Education Funds Development at the Presbyterian Foundation with the Committee on Theological Education. And I'm here today with my favorite theologian, Elizabeth Hinson-Hasty. She really is. Ever since I saw her in Hebrew Exegesis class in 1993. Last year, 25 years, Elizabeth, do you remember? 25 years.
That's right.
Married. And thanks for being here today. I know you're teaching, you're president-elect of the faculty at Bellarmine. You got a lot going on. You're the running partner of our daughter, because I can't do it with my bum knee. So I know there's a lot on your plate, and you have to take care of me, too. So I'm just grateful for you always, every day. And this is a special interview today. And it's because Elizabeth's been doing some work, which she does a lot, sort of in the background. And we like here to lift up those voices and that work. And I'm just glad that you're here. So thanks. Thanks for being here today.
I'm excited about it. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good. And she's been running, and she had a great time this morning, everybody. So she's all revved up, I know, and ready. I wanted to start before we move to the question I always ask about vocation, and before I introduce you, as part of an introduction, one of Elizabeth's early books, some of you have, and pastors, I've given this away. It's an edited book, Prayers, the New Social Awakening, Prayers for a New Social Awakening, inspired by the New Social Creed. This was back in 2008. And Elizabeth wrote a prayer in here for those without a place to call home. And in that prayer, it lifts up women. We're talking about women reformed and always reforming as part of the celebration of the 100 years of suffrage for women. And in that prayer, she says, "You have reminded us, O God, through the stories of Hagar, Job, Naomi, Jonah, and Dinah, through the stories of those who've lost their own sense of identity and worth, through their stories of those without a home of their own, through the stories of those who fled their homes as refugees, that you hear us when we are most vulnerable and travel with us in our greatest time of need." And I just want to say that I think that prayer is at the center of who you are, traveling with those who are vulnerable, teaching a class like Theology from the Margins, writing a book on a woman and the social gospel as your dissertation, Beyond the Social Maze, Vida Dutton Scudder's exploration of her theological ethics. Lifting up especially women along the way as you're writing. I don't have all of your books here, but many of them. One of my favorite that I don't have is a recently contributed essay about gossip and reclaiming gossip as God speak, right?
Mm-hmm. God sib. Look, comes from the Old English, God sib.
God sib. I mean, what's the name of the book? Encountering
the Sacred. And it draws on stories of women's lives. It's edited actually by two great Presbyterian women, Rebecca Todd Peters and Grace Cow. So really worth reading. Has some wonderful essays in there too from other women who are teaching and writing throughout the United States, trying to bring attention to the uniqueness of women's experiences as they reflect theologically.
Which is what you do. Your Women in Mystics class at Bellarmine, I know, is booked up semester after semester, sometimes ahead of time. And she's the professor of theology, chair of theology at Bellarmine University, also ordained a member of the Presbyterian Mid-Kentucky, and gives me a hard time because I've not joined her same presbytery. We do worship at the same church, however. And she just... lots of wonderful, work. One of the more recent books too is an essay with you and your theological dissertation advisor, Doug Otati, on mentoring, entitled "Mentoring with Humane Disposition, Attitude, and Imagination." To do justice, you mentioned Toddy Peters. This book you co-edited with her, which is great for Sunday school classes. Some people may not know, though, you've written things like in this World Council of Churches book, African Growth and Opportunity Act, who benefits? This is what theological ethicists do. And that issue of poverty became the award-winning book you wrote, The Problem of Wealth. I know some of that research. We've run out of copies here at home because we give it away. Dorothy Day for Armchair Theologians with Westminster John Knox Press. I'm just grateful for you as a teacher and a leader, a Fulbright scholar in Hungary. Y'all, I could go on a long time, but I better stop. We're going to post her CV in the chat there and take a look. There's a lot of things to read and learn about that she's done and is doing. And there's a new book coming out, and we've seen a preview of the cover. Tell us the name of that book.
Dutiful Love, and Empowering Individuals and Families Affected by Mental Illness. Great.
And today you're on the show because you were part of the chair in a consultation that inspired the study on the status of women that then led to that report. We'll put that link in the line if you've not read that gender and leadership report and study. That's extremely important. And then this video series that is just premiering late last month, sort of on the down low, soft launch, but now launched with TheoAcademy. And we'll post the links of those. Those are free for everybody. We're going to talk to you about those here. Before we get to that, I'd like to ask you, what is it that is the work your soul must have? You know, I've given a pitch for what I think it might be. What is it that is making you come alive, as Howard Thurman said? Elizabeth?
Yeah, I love that Thurman quote. You know, I guess that's always I want to say that's ever changing, but at the moment, in the midst of the COVID pandemic and with all of the distancing measures and really the kind of isolation that we've all been living in the last few months, one of the things that's made me come alive is watching my students, even in online classes, really have new discoveries. I taught this last semester 2 classes on a migrant's journey, and we spent the beginning of the semester reading the biblical text from the perspective of migration, and drew upon some work of some other great Presbyterian scholars like Margaret Amer to think about, you know, the Bible as a story of migration, and just seeing the kind of new imagination that they had after exploring the biblical text in that way really helped make me come alive. So I guess that's one professional response. And I mean, you mentioned, Lee, a lot about family, and I definitely would say that it's true. In recent weeks, running has made me come alive because it's not just about the feet on the pavement and the kind of feeling that gives to you physically and the emotional release of being outside, but it's also an opportunity in our city to see people. And so, you know, to run in the park and see people really having opportunities to speak with one another and to be in community, even with some distance there, is invigorating, especially, you know, at this point in time.
Right. Yeah. It's been fun watching you and Emmy run, and I've seen how it's centered. You come back different, you know, from that. And, you know, I know earlier in the pandemic, you were walking more and you were taking pictures, and you could see that, like I noticed when we walked together, folks should know that that's sort of how we got together. We started walking together in seminary, and now we walk the dog usually and talk. But I noticed that you are taking more time to sort of notice smaller things around, still asking always the bigger questions, but definitely noticing those things. But one of the questions is always central to you, and I'll say as a Reformed and feminist, social gospel type liberationist theologian, that you are always lifting up the voices long silenced, as we say in the brief statement of faith, particularly those of women. And so tell us about this video series. It's called Expanding the Narrative, because you're trying to expand the narrative, include women's voices, right? where did this get started? Just give us a little sketch of how we got to this video series. Why this video series? It all makes sense to, I think, anybody who's watching, because you don't have these resources. But how did you get there? Where did it start? And it started with actually action in the General Assembly, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me say, it's nice to have an opportunity and the privilege to really talk about this video series, but it certainly isn't work that I did alone. This was a very collaborative project, and it came originally out of the Advocacy Committee for Women's Concerns, and was partly instigated by a question that was raised by Lillian Oates. There may be people who are watching that know Lillian. She was a wonderful leader in Presbyterian women and also in ACWC at the time. And she had a significant question about the denomination at the time, which was there were about 63% women. And she wondered why it was that in a denomination that ordained women, that we also didn't see the same number of pastoral leaders serving congregations across the denomination that were also women. And so that just began a conversation in ACWC and raised a number of different questions that led to General Assembly action and the creation of a design team to design a churchwide study of the status of women. And I helped to chair that committee. And as part of our proposal for the design team, we wanted both a sociological study within the denomination and a theological study, really a theological consultation that would create new resources. If some of you who are watching may remember the old resources, we had a series of brochures. They really looked more like brochures, but they were short papers that were produced by the denomination. And they were on womanist theology, which was written by Katie Geneva Cannon. There was one on feminist theology that was written by Cynthia Campbell. And then there was one on Korean women's theology that was written by Unzu Lee. And I'm not sure that there were others, but those are the three that I remember that actually we were introduced to in seminary at Louisville Seminary through a meeting at the Women's Center. Those were very important texts, documents that were intended to encourage really church-wide study of theologies emerging from women's experiences. So when we were designing the sociological study and theological consultation, we always had in the back of our mind that we needed new resources and we need to reach out to Presbyterians in a different way than we had in the past. And we wanted a resource that would be more widely used. Right. So just to sum up there, the sociological study was produced. It was originally designed by Angie Andriott and Deb Coe in Research Services. And you can read that online. It's the Gender and Leadership Study. It was released, I believe, in 2018. And then we did the same year that was, the study was getting ready to be released. We had a theological consultation that was held at McCormick Seminary. And there were three different kinds of efforts that were to come out of that particular consultation. And one of them was the production of educational resources. And so the video series that is now available on TheoAcademy is the final kind of product of that. And really, I think a very rich resource, an exciting resource for the denomination, and something that we really haven't seen before.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'd see there are some women pastors, Anna Pickney Straight, who you recognized earlier, Terry Ott, who's chaplain at Monmouth College. Actually, she has a more prestigious role than that. Rebecca Malozzi, who's in Pennsylvania, Jody Craiglow, who is in Illinois and part of the Committee on Theological Education. But it's not just for women. This is for others. I'm thinking, and I remember right out of seminary teaching confirmation in Virginia, and you helping me, that wonderful confirmation curriculum there, but not very many women in that curriculum. And we added some women mystics. We added people in their own voices. I mean, this is a lifelong project for you, and I definitely join you in it. But I'm your student in this area, and these six videos have some interesting titles. How they're set up. They're about 25 minutes apiece. They have questions at the end, which, by the way, that's sort of how you do things. That's in this book. That's in To Do Justice. They're set up for people to learn, right? I mean, this is part of what you're up to, right? Is not just this being you being the expert, right? Is that how you would say? And that's even part of this whole project. It's not your voice primarily; it's other voices. Like, I mean, the list is amazing. Who are in this? Iniko, who was on the call, Shannon Craig O'Snell from Louisville Seminary, Cindy Rigby, Austin Seminary, Mihi Kim Court, Angela Johnson, Angela from Kowser, June Hahn, Eric Barreto, Kate Trigger Duffert, Carol Holbrook Prickett, David Daniels, Carmen Rosario. I mean, just Joanne Rodriguez, who's also on the planning team. It's lifting up their voices and others, right? I mean, that's what this is all about, and bringing your own voice, my voice, and the voice of whoever is watching into the room.
Well, it's really about a paradigm shift, I would say. So, I mean, part of what the objective of our planning team, and let me mention the planning team. So the members of the planning team included Carrie Allen, who's also been, she's now one of the chairs of MRTI, and was very involved in the study on Black women and girls that recently was presented at General Assembly. Also, Matilda Moros, who's a Reformed theologian that teaches in women and gender studies at VCU, Joanne Rodriguez, Hispanic Theological Institute at Princeton, and myself. And we were helped by a staff member, Beth Olker, in racial equity and women's intercultural ministries in the denominational offices. And part of what we were really trying to do is to say that, you know, one of the reasons that we need new educational resources is because we really need to go beyond program development, particularly when we think about the circumstances of women in the denomination and worldwide, but also when we think about moving beyond the gender binary and we begin to introduce in our broader denomination, not only theologies that are emerging from women's experiences, but also queer theologies, the experiences of LGBTQIA people, and how do we begin to reflect theologically in a way that really expands our broader narrative and invites us into new ways of experiencing God and working in the midst of community and making decisions to really move beyond just inclusion of these voices toward creating an authentic community of belonging that reflects, you know, the kind of vibrancy of our Reformed tradition. And so I think what the series represents is really an organic process that invites us into that larger conversation denominationally. And I'll just mention here, you know, part of the process, Landon Whitsett was our videographer and one of the primary producers here. And any of you that may have used some of his other resources from TheoAcademy will be well aware that he uses a kind of organic process, which I found very challenging at first. I mean, Lee was showing some of my texts, some of the books that I have worked on throughout my academic career, and I have a kind of linear process through which I do that. He lives with me, so he knows. But that's not at all how these videos were produced. We sat down actually with an agenda that I had helped to create with the planning team and with people who came to our two main filming sessions. But then what we ended up doing was really listening, sitting down with the people who were invited to be part of the project and really listening to them and being in conversation together. And after listening initially in our first taping session, which Angela Johnson and Iniko Ferenczi and Carmen Rosario had given a series of lectures. June Han also gave a lecture that she had prepared to present. We listened to those, and then the next day, I simply sat down and I raised a series of questions that really emerged from listening to their lectures. And then we filmed their responses in interviews. The responses were so profound that after the interviews, Landon kind of sidled up to me after a snack one day when we were filming over at Louisville Seminary. And he said, I think that these cameo shots, these interviews, these conversations between people who are present here need to be the centerpiece of these videos. And so that's exactly how the 6 videos ended up really being produced. And much of the language, the titles of the videos have come from comments that were made by people who are willing to be interviewed for them, or themes that were raised. And they really ended up being the product of a larger collective community. And we just helped to set the conditions that invited that kind of rich, organic, and developing conversation.
Right. There are some traditional, I've looked at most of the videos, and there are some kind of traditional lecture pieces in there.
Mm-hmm.
But the vast majority are these responses and even conversations between 2 and 3 folks. And those are very engaging. And I'm seeing in the list Hannah Shell, who teaches at was teaching at Monmouth. I think that's still true.
She's now at the Council of Independent Colleges working on their
adding some names here. I mean, that's what this is all about. Rose Niles, who is probably my second favorite theologian out there, is also on here. Shout out to Rose, who's with Austin Seminary. So the themes are, it's neglected stories is the first one, beyond Calvin, which you guess, of people who are looking, reforming movements with an S is the third, finding our own voice, which is part of this, transforming identity, and then it finishes with loving justice. One of my favorite questions, you mentioned earlier, you started asking some questions, and most of the folks who were interviewed were asked this question. And so I'm going to ask you this question and kind of give people a taste for what it's about. What's coming is, what is your date for the Reformation? That's a question you asked that were asked most of the folks, and it was not all in the 16th century.
No, actually, what's interesting in that particular video, which I think is Reforming Movements, is the video that invites people to think through that question. Surprisingly, there was only one person who responded with 1517, the historic date of Martin Luther tacking 95 theses on the door of a church in Wittenberg. And I'm going to stand by my date, I think, that I used in that particular video, which is 1920. And perhaps I'm celebrating that even more this year, now in the wake of an election. I was raised in a household where most of our conversations were really about the 2 things that you're always supposed to avoid in polite conversation: religion and politics. And so that 1920 date is incredibly important to me. And when I think about the many people...
Women's right to vote.
Women's right to vote. And, here we are in a year-long celebration of women's suffrage. And when I think about all of the people that it has taken throughout the many years, for the last 100 years, and not just that one year, 1920, but for the last 100 years, to be able to struggle to have their vote count. And even having to remember that again this year, that is an incredibly important date to me for a date of the Reformation.
When you look at the statistics of the vote, the last number of elections, but particularly 2020, and I'd say women of color in particular, made a tremendous difference in terms of the outcome of the election. So it's a date worth celebrating, and it continues to reform us. And I think you're right on point. another question you is asked in this series is about stories that need to be remembered in terms of the Reformation. Is there a particular short story that you think needs to be remembered that maybe most folks don't?
Oh my, I mean, this gives me an opportunity to plug the second video, which I really wanted to have. And if Rose Niles is watching, she'll understand the importance of this. The second one is called Beyond Calvin, as Lee mentioned. And part of the intention of that particular video is to have a resource for confirmation and to help another generation of Presbyterians not only understand some of the kind of central canon of reformers, John Calvin, Martin Luther, those figures whose names we all remember, but to claim the women who played key roles in the historic Reformation. We celebrated the 500th anniversary of the Reformation in 2017. And still, there's no statue in Geneva to honor Marie d'Anthony, who was one of the key leaders. And so when I think of, something to remember of those reformers, she had the courage and the audacity to write to a queen and to defend women's rights to preach on the basis of the biblical text.
Remind us the year.
That was in the 16th century. I don't remember the exact year off the top of my head, to be honest with you, Lee, but very near to the dates of the publication of the Institutes, which would be 1536. And there's some wonderful resources that are provided in that video too, to remember women from Hungary, from Central Europe, which is a story that is not told very often, as well as Carmen Rosario, who is a fantastic historian. She remembers women in Spain, and something that's not included in that video that will be posted later on the website. There'll be some additional resources that we add later to the website as we have time to edit them, is the full length of her lecture, where she reads women who were tried as part of the Inquisition in Spain. And she sees them as significant Reformed leaders. And as she reads off their names, she tells the story as to why we only have the memory of these women in a record of their trials. So they're not present in other history.
Wow.
But we have a memory of them in terms of
the Inquisitor.
The Inquisition, the Inquisitor, the questions that they were being asked, and the property that was taken from them, the penalties, other penalties, some of them even the death penalty, because they wanted to advocate for Reformed ideas. And I remember as I was listening to her read that, and as it was part of her lecture, that I just kept thinking of all the other people that are named today who are standing in solidarity, who are part of Reformed movements. And we're still reading off these lists of names of people who have been placed in vulnerable and precarious and sometimes dangerous positions because of their beliefs. So it's quite a powerful kind of video, I think, but also it conveys a powerful understanding of what Reformed movements are all about.
Right. There's some great definitions of what makes a reformer. I mean, folks, you're going to love this series. I know you will. And there's just grateful for the work you've done on that. Grateful for your scholarship, Elizabeth. All that you are, who you are, and not just because you're my spouse, but I think you're a real gift to the church and the world, to your students, and we're your students. I'm one of your students too. You've said it here, it's now on the internet and beyond. I wanted to do something a little different. Thank you. I'm going to do something a little different than I haven't done. Brene Brown often asks a couple of rapid fire questions at the end of her interviews. I thought those would be kind of fun. So here's the rapid fire questions. Hallmark movies, yes or no?
Oh gosh. Okay, you know that my answer was going to be no. But I'm going to say, I guess, yes.
What?
I'm going to change. I just want to,
Okay.
I want to do something a little surprising.
Okay. Post-COVID, what is the first thing you're going to do?
Travel.
What is the book that you've read the most times besides the Bible?
That I've read the most times. This is a strange one, but you know me well enough to understand why. It's called Socialism and Character.
That's Vita Dutton Scudder?
It's Vita Dutton Scudder.
What is it that centers you?
Running, absolutely. That's a continual theme.
And if I could supply you with a lifetime supply of ice cream in any one flavor, what would that flavor be?
Oh, Kemp's Miztrax frozen yogurt.
I knew you were going to say frozen yogurt. Okay, you've heard it here, friends. I'm just so grateful for you. We're going to, in a couple of weeks, cross your fingers. I think we have a really fun guest, another theological ethicist. I've got to confirm with this person, and writer and friend of ours. So I hope you'll join us in 2 weeks for that show. But before we go, let me just say thanks to all of you who've joined us. Feel free to share this, Facebook, YouTube, and our Leading Theologically podcast. And I invite you all, if you haven't, to subscribe and also review our podcast on wherever you get your podcast, Leading Theologically. And as we close, Elizabeth, Pam Prouty, our close friend, is on here. So many others. Belinda Curry is here. Terry Epling, who went to seminary with, who's in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Could you offer a blessing, charge, benediction for us, please?
Sure. I appreciated the prayer you picked at the beginning, and I had we hadn't talked about this, but I had a kind of similar theme for a charge. You know, we're on the road to Bethlehem here in Advent, and reflecting on the forced migration of Mary and Joseph as we await for Christ to be born again today. And I really want to emphasize, in hearing the voices of the participants in this video series, that it's more than just inviting us to have a conversation or to create a program that helps us understand women's experience, deepen our knowledge there, and also expand the gender binary and reflect on different theologies. What these people are calling for is really a paradigm shift that helps us think about our vocation in terms of solidarity and justice. And I guess I leave that with as a kind of charge or a call or a new way of thinking about vocation in 2020. And I just wanted to offer a prayer. This is a prayer I adapted from a World Council of Churches resource for women in empowerment. And you can look online if you're interested in some of their prayers. So if you would all join with me as we pray together for women and LGBTQIA people around the world. Life-giving and loving God, whose ears are always open and whose voice is heard among us in cries of distress and joy. We give you our deepest thanks for the many, many people, especially women today, who act for the common good. We give you thanks, O Holy One in our midst, for those who live in cities and who organize. They organize themselves to demonstrate on the streets. They organize themselves into cooperatives to give life-giving care to their families and communities. And they collaborate to support each other and speak the truth. We pray for those, O Mother among us, those who defend the right for access to land, especially those who are indigenous women. We give thanks for Black women, O God, who stand together up against prejudice and discrimination, and who confront exclusion and segregation, and who also manage to build solidarity and show us the way that we may join. God of justice and peace, give us energy today. Give us sustenance and invite us into your overwhelming imagination to remain committed in our vocation, oh God, to justice and to stand in solidarity together as we long for the community that you imagine for us. May that be our aim today and every day. Amen.
Amen. And thank you, Elizabeth. Beautiful prayer, and just spoke the truth once again to me, and I think the others who are with us.